Welcome to another installment of Defending Israel. I am your host, Rabbi Pinchas Landis. If you have not yet picked up a copy of my new book, Today in Jewish History, I encourage you to go right now to rabbilandis.com, order your copy. From the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate your support. Okay, enough commercials, let's delve into our video. In our previous videos, we have discussed the zero-sum mindset of the Palestinian Arabs perpetrated and instilled by the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini. His destructive leadership ensured that there would be no Arab state as prescribed by both the 1937 British Peel Commission and the 1947 United Nations Partition Plan. Both plans proposed partitioning Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. But Husseini's camp insisted that not a drop of land that was perceived as Muslims could be turned over to Jewish infidels. There would be no agreement that included a Jewish state, even if that meant that the Arabs would also not have their own state. The 1948 War of Independence saw any hope of an Arab state dashed. The areas promised for this state were annexed by Egypt and Jordan for 20 years, with no talks of turning over the rule of these lands to their inhabitants. Then, after the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel found themselves in control of large swaths of land, including all of the lands that were part of Mandatory Palestine. 10 days after the war's end, the Israeli cabinet authorized the government to return the Sinai to Egypt and the Golan Heights to Syria in exchange for peace treaties. Israel right away annexed the parts of Jerusalem that had been occupied by Jordan, but the question remained what to do with the rest of the land that was now known as the West Bank. The cabinet was split. Part wanted to return it to Jordan for a peace treaty with Jordan, and part wanted to give it over to the local population as the partition plan had originally asked for. This would have led to a Palestinian state. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol favored this latter option and sent a team to the West Bank to explore the option. Ambassador Michael Oren writes, 80 Palestinian notables were interviewed that summer, and each of them came back with more or less the same answer. They said, we would really like to be autonomous. We'd love to be independent someday, but if we make a treaty with Israel at this time, Arab radicals will kill us. We'll get a bullet in the head. And that was that. If you're keeping count, this was the third time the Palestinians rejected statehood. The fact that the Mufti's zero-sum mindset would continue on became crystal clear on September 1st, 1967, when the Arab League issued the infamous Khartoum resolution that stated the three no's: no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel. After the 1967 loss, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria were all diminished in the Arab world. Into that void stepped Yasser Arafat, Yamach Shemo. His Fatah movement believed that Palestinians needed to stop waiting on Egypt, Syria, or others to liberate them. They had to do it themselves. Fatah was now in control of the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, which had been founded in 1964 with the goal of destroying Israel. Arafat would dominate the movement until his death in 2004. He could have negotiated a two-state solution at this point, but instead he chose to perpetuate the zero-sum mindset of the Mufti. Under his control, the PLO quickly became the chief pioneer and practitioner of international terrorism. By 1987, the PLO was in fear of becoming irrelevant to the Palestinians. Their leaders, including Yasser Arafat, had lived in exile for some time now. At this point, they were running the organization from Tunisia. In December 1987, a local uprising in the West Bank and Gaza, which became known as the First Intifada, began. It was a local initiative and a sign of new, localized, homegrown Palestinian leadership. Arafat and his cronies realized that they needed to do something drastic to remain relevant and, frankly, to remain rich. The United States had long maintained that they would not recognize the PLO unless it renounced terrorism and recognized Israel's right to exist. In a speech in Geneva in December of 1988, Arafat did just that. The next day, President Reagan announced the start of a substantive dialogue. Israel remained skeptical, and rightfully so. When in 1990, the Palestine Liberation Front, a subset of the PLO, attempted an attack on the beaches of Tel Aviv, President George H.W. Bush suspended the two-year-old dialogue, though Israelis were still optimistic. On September 9, 1993, Arafat wrote to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin that the PLO recognized, quote, the right of the State of Israel to exist in peace and security, and renounced the use of terrorism and other acts of violence. Rabin replied the same day that the government of Israel had decided to recognize the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people and to commence negotiations with the PLO within the Middle East peace process. The next day, President Clinton also resumed the United States PLO dialogue that was suspended by his predecessor 3 years before. 1993 was the first time that the Palestinians seemed to move away from the zero-sum mindset ingrained by the Mufti. There were still many obstacles, including the fact that Arafat would say one thing in English, yet still toe the hard line when he was speaking in Arabic. On September 13, 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed. The idea of Oslo was that both sides would undertake a series of confidence-building measures for 5 years, and at the end, Israel would cede territory in Gaza and the West Bank for a Palestinian state. In return, the Palestinians would prevent attacks against Israel. Israel held up their end of the bargain in both Oslo and Oslo II. But from early in the process, the Palestinians proved unable to stop terror attacks. Following Oslo I, terror attacks not only did not stop, but increased. After each attack, Prime Minister Rabin would take to the airwaves saying that the terrorists were trying to thwart the peace process and that Israel was not going to reward them with that. But then it became all too clear that Arafat himself was doing little to stop the attacks. He would arrest the perpetrators, and then, when things quieted down, he would release them. We don't know how long Rabin's patience would have lasted with Arafat, because he was assassinated on November 4th, 1995. In 1999, Netanyahu was ousted by Ehud Barak, who ran on the platform of reviving the stalled process. Barak's main critique on the peace process was that it had been moving too slowly. He figured that Palestinian independence would empower the moderates to defeat their rejectionist rivals. He wanted to skip to the end of the process and grant Palestinian statehood to the Palestinians as soon as possible. In July of 2000, President Clinton hosted Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Chairman Arafat at Camp David. Determined to get to the finish line, Barak started the summit by offering all of the Gaza Strip and 80% of the West Bank. By the end of the 2 weeks, that increased to 91% of the West Bank and 1% of Israel proper to make up for the other 9%. This included most of Arab East Jerusalem. At the time, Leah Rabin, Yitzhak Rabin's widow, said Yitzhak would never have accepted this. Not only did Arafat not accept, but he didn't even make a counteroffer. At the close, Clinton blew up at Arafat by saying, "You have been here for 14 days and you have said no to everything." Palestinian state self-rejection, number 4. 2 months later, the Second Intifada began. Arafat not only did nothing to stop the deadly Intifada, but according to many sources, he was the one who actually had ordered it. But these smoking guns at the time did not stop Clinton and Barak. On December 23, 2000, Clinton put forth the Clinton parameters. This was supposed to be the counteroffer that Arafat never made. They called on Israel to make even deeper concessions. At the time, the Saudi ambassador to the United States, Prince Bandar, said that if Arafat does not accept what is available now, it won't be a tragedy, it will be a crime. President Mubarak of Egypt described the parameters as historic. Barak and his government accepted. Again, Arafat said no. Special Middle East coordinator under Clinton, Dennis Ross, said at the time, Arafat could not do a deal that ended the conflict. He could live with the process, but not with a conclusion. Palestinian state self-rejection, number 5. In February 2001, in light of the bloodshed of the Second Intifada, Ariel Sharon was elected in a landslide election. Sharon's strong security steps, including a security barrier between Israelis and Palestinians, brought the Second Intifada to an end. He then came to the conclusion that a bilateral agreement with the Palestinians was just not going to happen. So the Jews simply had to disengage from the Palestinians and let them figure it out on their own. He started with Gaza. And by September 12, 2005, there was not a single Israeli, military or civilian, left on the Strip. At that point, combined with all the international aid that was pouring into the Palestinian Authority, Gaza could have become the next Singapore or Dubai. But we all know what happened there instead. Within 6 months of the Gaza disengagement, Sharon suffered a major stroke which left him in a vegetative state for the rest of his life. His deputy, Ehud Olmert, became Israel's next prime minister. His goal was simple: to carry on Sharon's legacy and to reach a two-state solution as long as he had a partner on the other side to negotiate with. By late 2006, it was clear that the disengagement of Gaza had been a bad idea. By June of 2007, Hamas was in total control of the Strip. From 2006 to 2008, Olmert met with Mahmoud Abbas, Arafat's successor, 36 times. He went beyond the Clinton parameters, putting forth the most generous offer yet to the Palestinians. Like Arafat before him, Abbas not only did not accept, but didn't even make a counteroffer. Palestinian state self-rejection number 6. Why was it that Arafat and Abbas could never reach the finish line? I believe it's quite simple. They can go through the motions in order to get international support and aid and to keep themselves in power and wealthy, but in the end, they don't want to end up like President Sadat of Egypt or King Abdullah of Jordan, who were both assassinated for recognizing Israel. They can live with the process, but they weren't willing to die for peace. With Hamas presently in control of the hearts and minds of the Palestinians, the Mufti's zero-sum mindset is alive and well. The Palestinians have thrown away at least 6 opportunities at statehood since 1937, and there is no indication that the future will be any different. There is no way Israel can ever promise more than Olmert promised, yet there's still not a Palestinian state. Israel has been consistent and always asking for the same thing in exchange for Palestinian statehood: peace and security. Until there is someone amongst the Palestinians who can guarantee that, there will be no Palestinian state. In our next video, we will discuss how the Israel Defense Force is the most moral army in the world, contrary to media reports. And once again, please purchase your copy of Today in Jewish History at rabbilandis.com. I look forward to seeing you in our next video.